By the Whitney Young School and the Institute for Liberal Studies. I'm Dr. Tom McPartland, the chair of the Whitney Young School. In the first of our lectures, we learned about disease in the bee community, and in a way we're dealing with something parallel today. We're dealing with disease in the human community, disease in the body politic, the disease called slavery, and we're going to be dealing with one of the most dramatic developments, I think, in the last few hundred years, the movement to abolish slavery. And it's appropriate, therefore, that the heart of our presentation today will be a dramatic reenactment of one of the key episodes in that movement by Brian West. This story also invites philosophical reflection, not only in terms of ethics and justice, but also reflection about human nature. It also, of course, invites historical reflection. So today we will also have philosophical commentary by the coordinator of the philosophy program at Kentucky State, Dr. George Shields, and we will have historical commentary by the coordinator of the Africana Studies program, Dr. Cynthia Shelton. Dr. Shields will start first, Dr. Shelton will then follow. Dr. Shields will then introduce Brian West, who will do our reenactment, and when our presenters are done, they hope that you will have questions, and then they can engage in a discussion with you, the audience. And I believe there are some classroom sign-ups for different classes. The Whitney Young sign-up sheet has already been sent around, but I think there are in the philosophy class and the IGS class. We'll have sign-ups after the end of the lecture series. So without further ado, my colleague, Dr. George Shields.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I would like to point out that an important co-sponsor of this event is the Office of Student Life, and we thank Leslie Thomas for her generous help in putting together this event. Also, for my IGS 300 students and for the Philosophy 210 students, after the event, I have a sign-up sheet in the back table. If you'll sign then, I would appreciate that. The point of our presentation today is to introduce students to two remarkable individuals whom you may not have encountered in history or cultural studies courses. Recently, there has been a resurgence of interest in the life of William Wilberforce, a British parliamentarian who lived from 1759 to 1833 and who had an important role to play in the British abolition of slave trading and indeed the institution of slavery itself. This resurgence is evidenced by the motion picture Amazing Grace, directed by Michael Apted and starring Albert Finney as the Reverend John Newton, the person who authored Amazing Grace, the hymn, and who was a spiritual mentor to Wilberforce. And also Ewan Grufford, who starred as the lead protagonist, William Wilberforce, in the movie, and Yusau Indower as Olaudah Equiano, whom we'll hear more about later. Moreover, I should point out that a public television documentary on Wilberforce's life has been recently aired on KET. I must confess that seeing the movie Amazing Grace was one of the most profound cinematic experiences that I have ever had, and it moved me very deeply and emotionally, and it spurred a personal interest in the life of Wilberforce and the whole early abolitionist movement, about which I knew very little at the time. Having looked at Wilberforce's biography and articles on Wilberforce, what strikes me most is the absolute and complete devotion to the idea that cruelty and inhumanity to human beings, and indeed living things in general. Wilberforce was the founder of what we would call today the Humane Society, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And his view was that this kind of cruelty simply should not be tolerated. And this comes upon a profound religious conversion that Wilberforce had. And for Wilberforce, the properly moral question that should always confront us is, in the words of the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who shared Wilberforce's concern with humane treatment. The question before us is always, can the being suffer? Wilberforce was convinced that there was a deep connection between the grotesque inhumanity of slavery, the common cruelty in the treatment of animals, and the general behavior of human beings in the area of decorum, common courtesy, in speech, and in public order. Giving his all, committing his wealth, his time and energy, even in the face of grave digestive disorders and fatigue, and risking his political fortunes and friendship, he untiringly campaigned against the slave trade. Over 26 years, he pressed his case for abolition of the trade. Much of that time, he was often frustrated by numerous obstacles. And he won through passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807. In one of the most remarkable scenes in the history of British Parliament, and this is reenacted in the movie, the entire British nation and all elected officials, even Wilberforce's fiercest opponents, cheeringly celebrated the passage of the Slave Trade Act. And 3 days, fortunately for Wilberforce, 3 days before his death, the retired and ailing Wilberforce learned of another great milestone that he contributed to, which was the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. There is consensus among cultural historians, and certainly this is clear, made very clear in the KPT documentary, that Wilberforce did succeed in improving everyday moral and social conditions in the British Empire by virtue of his leadership. Although it should be pointed out that his earlier concern with especially the common vices among the poor did garner criticism from some in Parliament. For example, it was said that Wilberforce was concerned with social justices among the people that make less than 500 pounds a year, as one of his critics pointed out. But that's contradicted by the larger issue in Wilberforce's life, which was his absolute commitment to the social injustices, ridding us of the social injustice of slavery. But Wilberforce certainly did not act alone, and indeed some historians have argued that the influence of the 1840 5-volume biography of Wilberforce, authored by his sons, Robert and Samuel, may have contributed to an exaggeration of Wilberforce's role and a diminution of the role of his abolitionist colleague, Thomas Clarkson. But notwithstanding, it is clear from all the evidence that Wilberforce, Clarkson, and other members of the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade worked very closely together to mount a systematic public relations campaign and a political strategy to make the trade illegal. And in the midst of that campaign, Wilberforce and others met with and supported the sale of the autobiography of Olaudah Equiano. In the movie, Equiano and Wilberforce, perhaps this is apocryphal, but Equiano and Wilberforce together tour one of the slave ships that the Society arranged to have put in view of the public, and therefore trying to create a sense of general disgust about the slave trade. Over a considerable amount of time, this strategy did work in terms of changing public opinion. Now, on the note of Equiano, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our civil rights scholar and student of both Wilberforce and Equiano, who will speak more closely to Equiano's text. Dr. Cynthia Shelton, who is a professor in the Whitney program in Honors and Liberal Studies. Cynthia, please.